Welcome to the Your Audio Solutions Podcast, episode 9. 1 week to go to the Big 10. Thanks again for listening. I hope you have enjoyed it. In this episode, we have Bobby Owsinski, who you might know from his popular books such as The Mixing Engineer's Handbook, The Music Business Advice Book, or Social Media Promotion for Musicians. And those last two books is something, or the subject of those last two books is something we will get deeper into in this episode. Bobby also runs his very popular podcast called Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, where he gives you his personal insights into the industry of music, covering industry news, reviews, analysis, and tips, as well as offering interviews with prominent industry movers and shakers on every show. This was a great episode, and I think you're going to find a lot of useful tips and tricks you can use for your own career when it comes to the business part and the social media part. In this podcast episode, I talked to Bobby about him working with Frank Zappa and how Frank's skills as a salesman saved their project, why learning to network is critical to finding work, and why so much of the music business is based on relationships, what the infrastructure labels have that is so hard for you to recreate on your own, how we as freelance producers, engineers can determine our worth and charge for it, the problem with charging based on value rather than time, which is quite interesting because I promote being able to charge on value, but you'll see his argument and it's a valid one. We get into Spotify and if the argument that Spotify isn't paying artists, if that's valid, is a valid argument, and what happens if your friend who pays $10 a month to Spotify only streams your music? Would you get all $10 of it? See what the answer is to that one. If Spotify will be sold to the Chinese-owned Tencent, and if so, if this increase in money and music revenue would benefit all of us or just go to the top percent. Also, some interesting fact about what the UK, London, for example, got right when it comes to music venues and how they try to keep them alive versus how it works in the US. We also spoke about how you as producer, engineer, or artist can increase your fan base on social media and why you need to use it professionally. Why you need a website that you are in control over rather than relying on social media platforms. And why you need to focus on one platform at a time. How to write engaging Instagram or Facebook posts. And Bobby's strategy for Facebook ads. And also what the most essential thing you need on your website is. I think you'll love this episode and find a lot of useful tips. So definitely stay till the end because there's a lot of nuggets throughout. But before we get into this interview with Bobby Owsinski, I'd like to tell you about a free guide you can download right now. This guide is called 3 Tested Ways to Increase Your Client Base. And I made this free guide for people who either have a home studio or work in a professional studio and want to increase their client base. And if your technical skills are already up to par and you have already spent your whole life making music, but the only thing that's missing is the clients. Or perhaps you have finished your college degree and you're looking to get your foot in the door and work in a recording studio. The benefits you would get by downloading this guide is how to contact bands online by using my email script, and how to build profitable relationships that will get you paid work, and also how to get clients coming back for more, because you just don't want to hire them or them to hire you once and forget about you. You want them to come back. I'll also show you a simple technique or tip that you can use, that I use to get into recording studios, which is perfect if you're starting out. So if you want to get into any aspect of the music industry, this works. So check this free guide out by using the link below. I think you'll love it and find it very useful. But now over to Bobby Owsinski. I thought before we get into all the fun stuff about social media and business and all that sort of things, I'd love to ask you about the decision you took some years ago. I know you said to yourself, "I'm no longer a musician. I'm a studio person," and you said this was one of the happiest days of your life. So just wondering what led you to make that change and how came it was so positive for you.
Well, I never thought it would happen because I thought I was going to be a lifer, that I was always going to be playing somewhere. And, even if I wasn't playing on a big stage, I'd be playing in a club someplace because that's all I did from time I was like 15 years old. When I was in high school, I was playing 4 nights a week in clubs, even back then. So that's all I did. But the grind of it got to be, and the grind wasn't the playing. The playing was fine. It was the business around it that got to be very difficult. And you find that you start to take gigs not because they're fun, but because you need the money. So that diminished the fun aspect a lot. And then I did a horrible tour with a big English rock star who shall remain nameless. And at the end of it, I just decided this is no fun at all. I'm done. I packed it in, and when I did, the relief was amazing. I just felt so good because it was like, okay, now I can just move on to something else and try something different. I'm already doing a lot of work in the studio. Now I'll just concentrate on that, and it's a lot more fun.
Was that as a studio musician, or what was your profession in the studio, or role, I should say?
No, by that point in time, I was engineering a lot and I was producing a lot. So I found that to be much more fulfilling. The producing part, especially, not so much the engineering, but the producing part. So I did a number of records, none that were big hits, but some that were minor hits. But I was working all the time, so that was a lot of fun. That was good. And songwriting. I was doing a lot of writing too, so that was all much more fun because it was more creative, and I wasn't, working for someone else. When you're on the road with someone, it's their music, it's their vision. So after a while, that gets tiresome if you're creative at all.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
But so, what was your main instrument?
I was a guitar player, but in some cases I was a keyboard player too. It depends which part of my career. Sometimes I was a keyboard player, and sometimes a guitar player.
So, what did you start out playing? Was it one of them?
Accordion.
Accordion. Cool. How did you get into
Yeah.
playing accordion? Who inspired you to do that? Parents, maybe?
Well, I'm Polish on both sides of my family, and I grew up in an area that was very Polish, and that was part of the heritage. Play polkas and stuff like that. I hated it. I didn't like the music or like the accordion, that matter. That being said, it's funny because now I do like it. There's a television show here. It's on a farm channel. It's really a small network, but they have a station, or they have a show called Molly B's Polka Party. And every now and then I stumble across it, and I just have the best time watching it. It's a lot of fun, and I never would have thought that would have happened because I really didn't like the music growing up. Now that being said, I like it because it's very pure, and none of that has changed. It's still pure, and much of music that I really liked has changed and got less pure. So I tend to go more to stuff that's indigenous. I really do like indigenous music rather than and music that maybe is East and West combined. That's a lot of fun for me. But not that polka is like that at all, because it isn't. But
Right.
And the same with country music, for instance. I never liked country growing up, but I do now. But I especially like the older stuff that's very pure and mostly acoustic.
Yeah, that's very interesting, man. So, can you still play the accordion, or is that something you left behind?
Well, I probably could if I tried. I just haven't tried in a long time.
Okay.
Someone gave me one a few years ago, actually, and it's sitting in my garage.
Okay.
I haven't played it much.
Time to take it out and make some tunes.
Well, I'm actually a little afraid because if I start, my neighbors will hear me and they'll think that it'll be bad at first. So I don't want them to think that I'm a beginner again.
Yeah. Makes sense, man. But so you're skipping ahead here a bit, because I know you worked with Frank Zappa too, right?
For a little bit.
What was your role with that? Was that playing, or was that engineering, or in what aspect did you work with him?
Oh, it was on a lot of different levels. Frank helped my partner and I actually on a venture capital project. And Frank at the time was, and this, it seems like nothing today, but back then in the 80s, it was a big deal. My partner and I had created something called a microscorer. And the microscorer allowed you to, when you played music into it, it was a keyboard, it printed music out. Now, this seems like something that's so simple, and it is today, and it's not even considered, at all. But you have to consider back then this was revolutionary. There was no such thing. And actually, if you went onto any of the film lots, Paramount or Sony, there would be buildings, 3- and 4-story buildings, with nothing but copyists that would be listening to scores and be copying things out. Everything was done by hand. So this was revolutionary. Frank, on the other hand, wanted to deliver sheet music electronically to music stores. And he had something going on as well with that. So we collaborated on some projects together as far as that's concerned. And then he introduced us to some venture capital people. And, it was, again, these are things that today it just seems like nothing. But back then, they were revolutionary ideas. So I spent a fair amount of time with Frank in the studio, in his studio. I got to know Frank fairly well, and it was just a great time. He was a fantastic guy. I have lots of stories. Everybody that's ever been around him has tons of stories, and they're all good.
Are there any stories you can share? I know you have some really good ones on your blog, like the Black Page and Black Page audition, I should say, and him discovering a jazz guitarist. But do you have any other stories?
Other than that, well, the one with Steve Vai is always good.
Yeah, go ahead and tell it. I don't know if I've heard it.
Frank would come up with these chords that seemed to work on a keyboard but didn't on guitar. And he got Steve Vai in one day, and he gave him these chords to play, and Steve could not get the fingering. He just couldn't get these chord shapes together. And he tried and tried and tried, and finally said, Frank, this isn't possible. I can't do it. And Frank looked at him and said, well, that's okay. I hear Taylor Swift is looking for a guitar player. It wasn't Taylor Swift. It was somebody like that, back then. It was Debbie Gibson or somebody, a lightweight female artist.
Right.
And not that Taylor Swift is lightweight. She isn't at all. But someone that was, not in his league. And suddenly Steve found a way to play them.
Oh, yeah?
He thought a little harder, and he found out how to play them.
Wow.
But Frank was like that. Frank could be very intimidating, but not trying to be, just, throwing something off like that, saying, well, I hear somebody else is looking for somebody if you can't do it. And that would happen, often. He was just that kind of guy. But demanding, very demanding, like that. And he would get great results all the time. He would also burn people out. It was interesting because he would run 2 shifts, 2 8-hour shifts, and would bring a different set of musicians and engineers in after each, and he would keep on going. He didn't take any drugs, just coffee, strong coffee. And then after the second shift, he'd still work, and everybody else would go, be gone. Another good story. I don't know if you have time, but this is
fine.
Probably the best story.
Sure.
So I don't know when he ever slept. So he's introducing us to these venture capital guys. They're coming from Rothschild Incorporated. Rothschild at the time was the biggest venture capital company in the world. They're flying in from New York. So my partner and I were both living in little apartments at the time. We didn't want to meet these high-powered New York Wall Street guys, in our apartments. And Frank said, fine, use my studio. It's 9:30 in the morning and nobody will be around. Just have them come in the studio. Okay. So 9:30, these guys trundle in. There's one guy, young MBA, and his eyes are real big. And there's another older guy in a 3-piece suit. He couldn't care less about all this. And we start to give our pitch. And out of nowhere, Frank shows up. And he looks awful. His hair is matted on one side. He has a torn T-shirt. He's in his bare feet. He's in sweatpants, and there's no knees in either one. He just looks like crap. And my partner and I going, oh, no. And Frank was so brilliant. He just said, wait, guys, let me get this. And he's described our project better than we ever could to these venture capital guys and sold it. And it was like, again, he probably only had, a half hour's sleep knowing him, and he got up and he did this, and he was just brilliant, and something I'll never forget because he was just amazing.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is, he looked so bad that you'd think, oh, these guys are never going to take him seriously.
Right.
But he's so brilliant that they did. So that was my favorite one out of all of them.
Awesome. What do you think Frank's take would be on the current state of music today?
Well, I think he loves some of it. There's always great music happening, and there's no exception today. He would love some of the innovations and probably not so much others. Frank loved purity. He loved purity in playing. He demanded high precision with his playing, and you don't see too much of that around today, not as much as there used to be. So, but yet, knowing Frank, he would have rolled with everything. He would have rolled it with the technology. He was always on the leading edge of technology, always.
Right. Yeah, because he was a big fan of the synclavier, right? Which was a sampling machine back then, right? To some extent, yeah.
It was an additive synthesizer, a big additive synthesizer, which was unusual at the time. And I think it was like the first additive synthesizer. All the others were subtractive. And then what happened was a few years later, the DX7, the Yamaha DX7 came out, and that was a really cheap additive synthesizer. So you got it for $1,500 instead of $35,000.
Yeah.
And it was also the one of the first digital recorders, because up until then there was no such thing as recording digitally. So that it was a sampler first, then it was a full-on digital recorder, digital audio workstation. Very interesting and very cutting edge.
Yeah, and I mean, very expensive, as you said. Didn't Michael Jackson also use it on tour and stuff?
There was a lot of people that used that or a Fairlight. Fairlight was the competitor, and they had slightly different sound. Of course, they operated differently, and there was more Fairlights in Europe, and over here there was more synclaviers. But yeah, after a while, people started to take them on tour. The problem was it was new technology, so if you took one, you had to take two, because one was always breaking down, especially things like hard drives. I can remember the first hard drive. So this really dates me, but okay, so I'm looking at this drive right here. This is a 4 terabyte drive. Okay. There was a 5 5K drive,
Yeah.
5K. And it was huge. It was this big
Wow.
and
Yeah.
this high. It
Yeah.
was huge. And we all marveled at it at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. I can imagine, man. Yeah, times have changed. It really has.
Much for the better. Yeah, much for the better. I mean, there's a lot of things that were cool back then, a lot of things not so much.
Mm.
It's no different than now. I mean, again, I'm not nostalgic for the old days whatsoever. The way I look at it is everything changes, it evolves. You got to change with it or else you get left behind.
Yeah.
It's always been that way.
Yeah, exactly, man. Totally
Yeah.
agree. So I'd like to get into more some of your topics of your books, because obviously you have a lot of books, and I think a lot of people know of your books already, like the mixing and all those great books that you, when you start out, you probably read at some point. But you also have these books on business and social media, and that's the sort of topic I'd like to discuss with you a bit more, because I think that's really helpful to people listening to this podcast and so forth. So there's a few questions I had in mind. And in your business book, you speak about, so you have a chapter about why learning to network is critical to find work. Just wonder if you can expand on that and why it is critical.
Well, let me just explain that book first. It's a music business advice book. It's not my advice.
Right.
It's the advice from all of the people that appeared on my podcast. Because at the end, I asked them the same question every single time. It's, what's the best piece of business advice that you ever received from somebody, or maybe you learned along the way? So I compiled all these from 150 or so guests. And they all started to fall into different silos, so to speak.
Right.
There's 5 or 6 different ones, and one of them was about networking. So, I contributed a little bit, but most of it's from my guests. But, here's the thing about networking. I was never really good at it. I'm still not really good at it. But I understand why you need to do it. So much of the music business is based on relationships. And the ones that have the relationships are the ones that work and see their careers progress. There are so few people in the business that are truly brilliant. There are some, but most, we're all the same for the most part. So what separates people is the fact, if you're not one of those brilliant ones, which you probably aren't, what separates everybody is what their network is and what people they know and how they get to know them. And what I've found is a couple of things. The first thing is the people that stay with it and are persistent are the ones that end up, I don't want to say they become stars. Some do, but they become successful in the business. They work. And for many people, that's all they want. They just want a job in the music business, and they want it to be a good job, and definitely that can happen. But you have to hang in there, and that's not easy sometimes, especially when you're starting. It's never easy for anybody to get in the business, except for a few people. I mean, we all hear the stories about people that happens immediately to them and they're instant success, but most people are not like that. So I think that's a big thing. The next thing is sort of how to network, and I've heard all sorts of really good ways to do it. Probably the best was, and I cannot think of his name, but he's the musical director for Alicia Keys. I just can't think of his name. And when he went to New York, he didn't know anybody, but he kept on hearing about parties, industry parties. So he'd go to every party, and when he'd go there, he'd walk around to every person and just say, hi, just say hello. That would be it. Hi, how you doing? Walk away. And he did this for about a year. And finally, everybody thought they knew him because he was always there. I always say hi to him. And then finally, one guy said, wait, stop. Come over here. Talk to me. Who are you? What do you do? And he said, he told him he was a musician and a writer, and the guy happened to be an A&R guy from Columbia. And he said, well, meet me in my office on Monday morning and let's hear what you have. And Monday afternoon, he was in the studio, and I'm not sure if he was working with P. Diddy or, somebody like, he was working with a big artist from that. It took him a while, and then next thing you know, he's working with Alicia Keys, but a whole bunch of R&B and hip hop people from New York, and that became his career. But it started from very innocent, just saying hello to everybody, and I always thought that was a great way to do it.
Yeah, I mean that ties into a tip I received when I was back in school, which similar to that. Where you don't really reach out to anyone saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a job," etc. You, like you said, and what he did is like you show interest to them, and you build upon that. I think that's works really well, to be honest.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there are certain methods of doing this. There's lots of different ways.
Mm-hmm. Any other tips you can share on that topic you've heard that would be different to this one?
Well, there's doing it personally, and there's also doing it electronically. And it's a little different electronically because it's very easy to get blocked or to get put in the trash can.
Sure, yeah.
So you have to be very brief, to the point, and you have to either make an instant impact, which has to be, I'm going to help you somehow first, and then maybe you'll help me. That's implied. You're not saying that. Or it's, I'm looking for some help. This is exactly what I'm looking for. Can you help me? And surprisingly enough, that works really well electronically. And just being to the point. Emails, LinkedIn, especially LinkedIn, is good for things like that, and people will try to help you. If again you're pretty genuine, you're to the point, exactly what you want. If you just say, I'm looking for a job, sometimes that's too broad. So people say, well, I don't know what you do. But if you say, I'm looking for this kind of job, this is what I've done before, it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I don't know anything, but I'll keep it in mind. And you might get an email back, or a DM back saying, you might try this, you might try somebody else. People in the business really try to help you. I found this out early in my career. I had some good luck. When I first got into town, I produced a duo. I had produced their demos prior to them getting into town. I got in 6 months before they did. Then I produced a bunch of songs, and they were signed to Warner Brothers through that. But before they were signed, we made some trips around town to different A&R people, and they would say, and it was mostly, I would hear from an attorney, or I'd hear from somebody saying, you should go speak to this person. I'd go speak to him. And usually what they used to do is say, well, we're not looking for that, but you know what? You might go over to this label and ask for so-and-so, and here, let me make a call for you, and just go over and see him, because that's more what they do. And we made the rounds to quite a number of labels from that, none of which signed us. The one that ended up signing us was kind of out of the blue. That was complete serendipity. What happened was, the guys are driving down the street on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood here, and they see Ted Templeman, was a big producer, produced Van Halen, produced Doobie Brothers, and he's going into Sunset Sound, and they screech the car to a halt. And they run over to him and say, Ted, you got to hear this, and put a set of headphones on him. And he went like, ah. And he listened to the first chorus, and he went, okay, wait a second. What else you got? And they played something else, and he said, okay, wait here. And he went in, and he postponed his session, and he came back, and he took him back to Warner Brothers, and that started the signing process.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
that was I never would have done that.
Right.
You know, I
Yeah.
would have seen him and I would have thought, well, I'm not going to bother the poor guy, right? But they did, and it kind of worked out. It just goes to show you never know.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly, man. And that's very true.
So anyway, in that whole process there, and then of course, once we got the bite from Warner Brothers, it was there. Everybody wanted to figure out what was going on, so I'd be getting calls. Well, come in and see us. Come in and see us. Come in and see us. It's that kind of an industry where if you get one bite, you get a lot of them because no one wants to be left out.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's still, it's no different. It's still the same.
Hmm.
I think the big difference now is, do you actually want to sign with the record label? There was no alternative back then. Now, of course, there's plenty of alternatives, and there's lots of artists that are saying, I don't know if it's a good idea.
Yeah. I just spoke to Eric Serafin about just that. I asked him, is it worth getting a label these days? And yeah, what is your thought on that?
Well, yes, under the right circumstances. If the thing about record labels is that everybody misses, they don't sign you for your music. They sign you for your audience. So either you have an audience or they think you're going to have one. You have a potential audience. So that's what they sign you for, because they want to make money. If you already have an audience and you've risen to a certain level, there comes a point in time where if you want to be a superstar, if you think you can do it, the only way you can do it is with the major label, because they have that infrastructure that can't be regenerated. I mean, you can't reinvent the wheel there. It would take too much. So you reach a certain level in order to go higher, to become a global superstar. You kind of need that.
So what's that infrastructure they have that's so important, or yeah, how is it built up that makes it so hard to create a new one?
A lot of it you can buy now because of label services. You know what label services are, right? The record labels a few years ago made the decision, and I don't know if someone asked them for this or they decided on their own. I never really got that straight, but they had all of this infrastructure, and they basically said, well, if you want, you can buy pieces of it. Just come in and we'll sell you these services without you signing to the label. So, you can go in and you can just say, I want radio promotion, because you're really good at radio promotion. And then you just pay for that. So that's label services. If you went anywhere, and what they're really good at is promotion. They have excellent integrated promotional services. Integrated meaning, if you were to do it on your own, you can get promotion, but you can get promotion that's really good at social media. You can get promotion that's really good at traditional media. You can get promotion that's especially good with television, if you're trying to get on TV. But you're buying a piecemeal. The record labels have it all integrated. So basically they have someone that says, okay, here's our campaign. We're going here, and then we're going to do this at the same time, social media. Then we're going to try to get you on these particular television shows, and this is what's going to happen. And then we're going to come back and have this campaign with YouTube, and then we're going to go to Spotify and see if we can get on the Spotify playlist, whatever playlists that are important. And so that's what they have. They have that integrated ability that you can buy pieces of, but it's, unless you have somebody that's running that, it's hard for you to pull off.
Right. I see. Yeah. That's interesting. So basically a label, also going back to what we talked about just previously, is it worth getting a label these days, except for the stuff you mentioned now?
Well, the other thing is, if they're throwing so much money at you, which there's more money than there has been in a really long time, if they're throwing so much money at you that you might say it's worth it. It's worth the chance here, because I can't make this kind of money any other way in the short term. Long term, maybe, but not in the short term. So that's a really good reason as well. They're just throwing a lot of money at you. Um, Still, if you're that hot that's happening, usually you can probably do better on your own. I don't know if you heard the news today about Taylor Swift and about Big Machine, her first record label being sold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just read it today, actually.
Yeah, and with that was all of her masters of her first 6 albums, I think. And that's the real problem right there. When you sign with a record label, they own your assets, and or they control them. Same thing, almost. So what ends up happening is it's very difficult for you to get those back later. At least when you're doing it on your own, you own those. Now, if you own them and they're not worth anything, it doesn't matter. But on the other hand, if there is some worth to them, if you do have a hit of some type, even if it's minor, then that's worth owning. So I don't think there's any right or wrong way or any one way to do it. It's on a case by case basis, because again, you may have some label that really wants you that you don't feel good about, you don't like the people, or you're not sure if the people are going to stay there. I mean, that's always been one of the biggest problems at record labels, where you have a bunch of people that are really into you and your music and are doing a great job, and then all of a sudden they all get fired. There's a regime change. New people come in and they feel differently, and all of a sudden they're not doing the job for you. So that's been a problem for 50 years.
Right. Yeah. I think I've heard you speak about that before, actually. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the chances you take, I guess. Signing to a label, You can be hot 1 minute, but then you're out, next year.
On the other hand, it's really difficult to do it yourself. Now, obviously, if you're at that point, you probably have a manager. Your management is doing a lot of that stuff. If you have even if you have a low-level manager, usually they can do some sort of a deal with a bigger management company to get some of those things going on. So now management companies they operate like record labels in many ways, and they can pull a lot of that off. That's how the business is evolving. We're finding that managers are becoming more well-versed in how to do many of the things that record labels did. And they're more able to do many of those, the promotional things. So it's falling onto a manager and his or her team. But if it's if it's just the artist doing a do-it-yourself thing, you can do it for so long, but there comes a point in time where you do need help and you do need that infrastructure yourself. So you do have to get a manager. But you're not going to get a manager, if you're just starting. No one wants to manage you unless you're making money, unless it's a friend or, someone from school or whatever. But that's how most of them start anyway.
Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah, it's very interesting, the whole record label manager aspect of the music business. But I'd like to go back to you. I think you also mentioned in the same book, I believe, and it's the question of how we as freelancers, whether you're a recording engineer, producer, whatever, freelancer, how we can determine what we are worth and how we can charge properly for our work. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a hard one. It's always been hard. When you're first starting, you need credits more than you need money. So you take whatever you can, just so you can get those credits. At a certain point in time, you don't need the credits. You need the money more because you have plenty of credits. So that's the point where you basically say, okay, well, now I have to get paid. You have to pay me something at least. It usually goes in increments. It's pay me whatever you can first, and then it goes to pay me this amount, and then it gets more stringent. Then it's pay me this amount per hour, or pay me this amount per day, or this amount per mix. And I'm just going to work whatever to make you happy. And then it goes another step, which is, okay, pay me this amount, but if you need revisions or if you need changes or whatever, you only get one or two. So basically, your criteria keeps on changing, and if you have hits, your price goes up. But in the beginning, you need credits more than anything because you need the
exposure, maybe.
No, the validation, the social validation.
Right.
It's the authority, what we call online social authority. You basically need that. So that's why you just have to work as much as you can on as much as you can. So, but again, it's hard to figure out what you're worth. Usually it's, well, there's another person like me that is making this amount of money, so I'm going to charge this amount because they're working on at the same level of the same clients.
Right.
And it's a comparison thing.
Yeah. But so what is your take on charging based on value rather than time? Because that's something I'm trying to get into habit of, rather than say to a client like my hourly rate is whatever. It feels better to charge them on the value of the project, because then time doesn't really matter. It shouldn't really matter. The value is still the same. What's your take on that concept?
Well, the only problem with that is, and I've done that and I still do it sometimes, the project can just go on forever and ever and the value stays the same.
Right.
So I had a project last year, for instance, that was supposed to take about 6 weeks and wound up taking a better part of 6 months. Not all the time, but it lasted way longer than it should have. It was important to get it right, but on the other hand, I could have made a lot more money had I charged per hour or even per day, rather than just by, I guess this was a per song rate in some cases. You always have those people that they'll take advantage of you either knowingly or unknowingly. I had a client once upon a time that was brilliant, a songwriter that would write a song, we'd finish it, and he'd go, it needs a reggae feel. And we'd cut it again as a reggae song, and then he'd go, it's a power ballad, and we'd cut it a third time. And it wasn't making it better, it was making it different. I wasn't getting paid more, in that case. So, that's the risk that you run, that, you can have something that will just go forever and you won't get paid for the additional time you put in.
Is there any way of having something to guard yourself against a situation like that?
Yes, an hourly or daily rate.
Right.
That's the best thing. At one point in time, you could go in and you could charge, you can get a piece of the project. And that's the other thing that happens with people. When you first start, they'll say, well, I'll give you points. And for some, it pays off once in a great while. Usually it doesn't. Once in a great while, it pays off. Most everyone I know that has done that has really not made out well, because even if the project hits, somehow they forget about the agreement that you had. And usually when you're young, when you're first starting, you don't think about writing it all down. And certainly not getting an attorney involved, because you think, if I get the attorney involved, then they're going to back out. They won't want me. So, there's that. So what ends up happening is you're taken advantage of. Now, producers got paid on a point system. They would get an advance on royalties and then get paid usually 3%. Sometimes it would be higher, 4 or 5% of the wholesale value. If you're lucky, you got retail. And that worked on sales. It doesn't work on streaming, because, you're not making any money for the most part, unless you can get part of the publishing. And the producers started to go to that. They'd start to go to the artists and say, I have to get paid somehow for my time, so give me a little bit of your publishing. Now it's all changed a bit in the United States, where the Music Modernization Act now allows producers to get paid and engineers to get paid a piece of the streaming action, so to speak. And even though you could make those deals, the artist would collect the money, and then it was up to the artist to pay you. So that was always hard to track your money down. And now it'll just, come directly from the organization, from Sound Exchange. So that makes it a little bit easier. It's not from all the services, but it's a start. So I think that's what's going to happen sooner or later, where it'll be back to the old days. You'll be getting paid on streaming.
Right.
Is that enough? Maybe not.
Right.
For producer.
So what's your, when people complain about how artists is not getting paid enough from streaming services, which is true, but I'm just wondering, is that the right argument? Because Spotify, for example, is not really paying the artists directly. It's going to the label, who then pays the artist, right? Like it's always been. So shouldn't the discussion be Spotify, or actually the label is paying the artist not well enough, rather than Spotify not doing it?
Well, there are many things here. The first thing is most people don't understand where the royalties come from. With Spotify, there's 3 royalties that are generated. There's 2 publishing royalties, there's performance, and there's mechanical, and there's the sound recording royalty. And these often get interchanged, where the people that are writing about this don't understand. So they'll take a figure that's for one thing and they'll interchange it with another. And then everybody gets confused as a result. So this has been happening a lot with Pandora, for instance, in the United States, and Sirius XM satellite. There's 2 royalties. But again, it's publishing royalty and it's a sound recording royalty. In both cases, there are entities in between before the songwriter gets paid or the artist gets paid. That's the problem. There's lots of money being generated. There's plenty of money being generated in the music business, but not much of it comes down to the artist or songwriter level. With the record label who's collecting the sound recording royalty, they're taking, depending on what label you sign with and what the deal is, they're taking anywhere from 50 to 90% of what's being generated.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Now, if it's 90%, that's not a good deal. You probably shouldn't sign that, but there are people that do that because they want a record deal so badly. Usually it's somewhere around 20%. So what happens is the record label is getting 80% of what's being generated. So yeah, you're not getting too much. If you're the songwriter, you're making a little more, but songwriting royalties are about 1/6 of what the recording royalty is. And then you have the publisher in between, plus you have performance right organization. At least here you have ASCAP or BMI, they're taking another 16%. So, there's a lot of fingers in the pie that are taking money before they hit, the creator.
Yeah.
That's the big problem. And not many people understand how this all works. It's very complicated. When people are writing about it, they get it very confused. I've studied this a lot to try to get this right. And I've written a book about it, and I've gone through this in detail to try to get it as right as I can. And even sometimes I'm scratching my head thinking, well, wait, okay, what is this exactly? And I've talked to attorneys and music publishers and record label people, and they don't know a lot of times. There's a handful of attorneys that deal with this every day that kind of know this inside out, but there's not many people in the world that can tell you the right answers on this. So, as a result, there's a lot of money being generated. There's not a lot trickling down, or there's some, but not that much being trickled down. Now, here's the other thing about Spotify people don't understand. If you have a friend who's paying $10 a month on Spotify, and all he does is stream your music 100% of the time, what happens to that $10? Do you get all $10 of it? Because he just streamed your stuff. Do you get it?
Probably not.
No, no. When they talk about you're getting paid per stream, it's an average. But what happens is all this money goes into a big pot, and there's a very complex formula that figures this all out, which Spotify is really good because they show you this. They give it to you online. It's just that you have to be a math major to understand how to decipher it. But essentially, you're getting paid on market share. So, for instance, Ed Sheeran makes more per stream than you or I would because he has a larger market share. So the more you make, the more you make is the way that works.
Right.
We don't know what Apple Music is. They won't tell us how they generate that. It's probably similar. And some of the other ones we don't know. It's not a very transparent business. But when you hear a per stream royalty rate, it's a broad average. Broad average. Another thing that people don't understand is how that's actually developed. Okay, we'll make it easy. Every country has a different rate. The reason why is in the United States, it's $9.99 a month for Spotify. In India, I think it's equivalent to $1.85. So if you have millions of streams in India, you're going to get paid a whole lot less because there's a lot less money being generated. So it depends on what country your streams are being generated. Yeah. Then it depends on the tier. There's a premium tier that people are paying for. There's a free tier. If most of your streams are coming from the free tier, you're making a whole lot less money. So there's lots of complex issues there that makes it very difficult to really determine what is what in all of this. That being said, the only thing that's true all the time is there's always a record label or a publisher or another entity that's taking a big piece in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very fascinating how that whole thing works. But I heard in a recent podcast of yours where you think Spotify might be sold in this year, perhaps. Do you think that's still going to happen, or?
I don't think. Well, there's no indication that this year something like that will happen. I would think that it would happen soon. It's not generating any profits. I would think that Tencent would be the likely entity to buy it. Tencent, of course, it's the Spotify equivalent in China, only much larger. Much larger.
Oh, it's larger in China, not in the world.
China.
Yeah.
Well, both actually. They've now gone public in the United States as well, and it already owns 10% of Spotify.
Oh. And they're called Tencent, you said?
Tencent.
Right.
Tencent is the biggest in the world, which most people don't know about. Of course, they're Asian, so it's mostly Asian content that's on there, but they have a billion users.
Right. Yeah.
Nobody else has that many, and it's not expensive. So again, there's a lot of money that's generated, but it's not on a per user basis. But I would expect that they would be the purchasers eventually.
And what do you think is going to happen to the music industry then? Do you think we're going to see more money, or are we going to see more money basically?
Goldman Sachs predicts that it's going to grow, but it's going to be twice as large by the year 2030.
Wow.
More than twice as large, yeah. And there'll be more people paying for streaming.
Do you think that's going to make up for how it was in 99 when it was at the highest peak, or it's going to be more than that?
It's supposed to be more.
Wow, okay.
If you listen to Goldman, they say more.
Wow.
And that's why, it's actually pretty good times in the business now. It's the best it's been in 10 years. There's more money for budgets. There's more money being spent on artists. There's more artists being signed in a long, long time. A friend of my family just got $1 million deal to sign. I had nothing to do with it, but but I happened to see what was happening, and it was like, wow, there's a lot of money out there. That wouldn't have happened 5 years ago, something like this. It's an artist that you haven't heard of.
Yeah, but do you think how should I say this? How do you think that increase in money in the business as a whole will affect people who are not world stars? Do you think it's going to be more work for people who works, not in big studios and all that sort of stuff?
No, what's happening is we're seeing what's happening in the music business is similar to, at least in the United States. It's not like this in every country, but in the United States, increasingly we have the 1% that owns everything, and very little in the middle, and then people that are just getting by in the bottom, and which is the opposite. There used to be a big middle class, and in music there used to be a big middle class as well, and that's happening less and less, where you don't have that. One of the things that people don't understand is in the music business, when I first started, this is the biggest difference, is that if you wanted to make a living as a musician, you could do it very easily without ever making your own music. There were so many venues that you could play. I can remember begging for a night off, and doing 300 nights a year, just as a working musician playing. And that's not possible any longer. So that, and a couple of things are sad about that. One is the fact that musicians really got their chops together. You became a pretty good player when you played 4 sets a night every night. That was the first thing. The second thing is you got really good at performing because you're always in front of people. So we've kind of lost that ability. It's like that in most places in the world, I have to say. There's fewer places to gig, and it's a shame. So that's one of the things that I think has hurt music a lot, because there's not as much interaction with real people as there used to be.
Right. Makes sense. But yeah, I think there's quite a lot of that here in London, actually. Live music. That's also how I do many gigs myself as a sound engineer, in clubs that are, function gigs, for example. I see that quite a lot here.
Well, London is an exception because, well, they're trying to be anyway, because they have a person in the government that's looking out specifically for music venues. You know that?
No, I didn't know that, actually.
They call it a late night czar.
Okay.
And there's a person that's looking out specifically for venues, trying to make sure that they stay open, because there was a gentrification. Well, there was a problem with clubs starting to close, mostly because areas were getting gentrified where clubs were in. So it got too expensive. Insurance got too expensive. And as a result, London kind of caught that quickly and is trying to stop that from happening.
That's good, actually.
Yeah. We're seeing other big cities are trying that, but they were first, and they're the most successful so far at it.
Ah, perfect. I mean, yeah, I'm glad I'm living here now.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's
Where are
really
you from?
good, man. I'm actually from Sweden.
Okay.
But yeah, I've been here 6 years, I think, ish.
What's the music scene like in Sweden?
I mean, it's really good. I think you know this more than me, I think, but it's like the third largest export in music, I guess. Just under, England, I think. But I think you have to move to Stockholm to do it, maybe another city, but London was closer and it seemed cooler when I made the choice,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a great country for music. There's classic bands like, ABBA, Roxette, you have Avicii and all those guys now.
Sure.
So yeah, it's a huge country music.
Is there a lot of venues?
That I don't know, actually. I haven't really explored the venues in Sweden, to be honest. So I couldn't tell you that. But I don't think it's like here in London. But it might also be a population question, because, the amount of people live in Sweden live just in London, itself. So
Yeah.
that probably affects it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's good to know, man. Thanks for telling me that about London. But yeah, the music business is really fascinating. It's a topic which can be discussed and asked about for hours. But I'd like to move on to social media, because you also have another book on that, called Social Media Promotion for Musicians. But I assume you can also apply these techniques if you're an engineer or producer and you want to promote your work. So I'm wondering, if you are an engineer or producer or anything, to be honest, what's the process of increasing, your fan base on social media?
Well, I think that most professional people, and I'm including musicians in that, don't use social media the way they should, because you have to use it professionally. If you're a professional, you have to use it professionally, and they use it casually. When you use it casually, you kind of violate the rules of making it work for you, because you're talking mostly to friends and family, and what you're trying to do is build up an audience. So the best way to do it, I always tell people the same thing, it's what you post. The biggest rule is you're trying to inform people of what you're doing. Either what you just worked on, what you're working on now, or what you're about to work on. That's what you're talking about. You're not talking about anything else. You're not talking about personal stuff. You're not talking about friends and family. You're not talking about politics or religion or anything like that that's controversial. You're just talking about what you're doing, and it's not bragging, it's informing. So you're informing people about these people that you're working with, the music that you're working on, or you're about to, or you just did. So that's number one. The other thing is, some really basic stuff. Always post a photo and always post a link. And hopefully the link goes back to a website, your website. That's a thing that many who are active on social media have determined they don't need, but they really do. It's important that you have a personal or an artist or a professional website. The reason why is it's the only thing you can really control online. It's yours. You decide what happens to it. With social media, we've seen over and over and over how that changes. Every 6 months, Facebook changes. And we're seeing almost the same thing with Instagram now. Facebook owns. So you can never be sure that what you're doing today and the people you're reaching today are going to be there tomorrow, and it's going to be the same. So you just can't control stuff. We've seen over and over where there have been platforms that have either disappeared or have changed completely, where you had a big fan base that disappears because of the platform. So that's why I say don't depend on social media, because you can't control it. The only thing you can control is a website, so at least get that. There's a story I like to tell that kind of illustrates this. There is a band here in Los Angeles, and this is back in the MySpace days, and they had a following of 800,000 on MySpace, which was substantial. So they were signed by Universal, and Universal told them, don't worry about MySpace. Let us control all of that. We'll do all your social media because we're really good at it. So they let all that stuff go. And when their album came out, guess what? The record label dropped the ball. They had no way to let all those fans know that their album came out, and they were dropped. Now, if they would have had a mailing list with all those names on there, if they would have had a website they could control, at least they would have had a way to talk to some of those people, and maybe they'd be superstars now. We don't know. So, but it's one of those things where you have to control what you can control, and the one thing you control is your mailing list and your website. They may seem passé, but they're really useful and necessary. So that's the one thing I tell everybody, get that really good and then everything else will fall in place. The other thing is just work on one social media platform at a time because they're hard. If you're going to do this well, you have to learn each one really well and you have to take advantage of it. And it takes time. So, the best thing is learn one platform and learn it really well before you move on to another one and add it. Best thing I can say.
And do you start with just one, or do you have several now?
I have several. I have, I dabble with a lot of them because I almost have to because of some of the books that I write, because I have to know about some of the things. But I'm less active in some than others. For me, it's primarily Facebook, but I'm moving more into Instagram. Instagram is a much better platform right now. It's much better for musicians or artists, for sure.
Why is that, by the way?
Well, the audience on Instagram is more music oriented. And there's been lots of studies that have found this out. So, you're much better off to be over there. And you can do much more with it as well. So, that's what I do. I do some on Twitter. Mostly I use Twitter as a broadcast tool. I just broadcast what my posts are, what my blog posts are. And then for me it's the blogs. I have two blogs. One is 10 years old and the other is 9 years old. So there's thousands of posts on those. And it's funny because once upon a time blogs were the thing and now they're not. So I found that the consumption of my blogs has gone down a lot, and it worried me, but then I realized, well, not many people really read blogs anymore. So not like they used to. They don't consume in the same way.
What do you think they do instead? Do you think they watch videos and listen to podcasts? Or
well, podcasts are bigger for sure, and my podcast essentially took the place of the blogs. I still do the blogs, but again, I have many more listeners on podcasts than I do on blogs. But in general, it's more social and YouTube. YouTube, I never played in a whole lot. And the reason why, and this was totally wrong, I don't want to say I'm a perfectionist, but when I do something, I like to get it right. So when I do videos, I they're produced fairly well. That's contrary to the way you should use YouTube. And, you just take your phone, and that's very effective. And sometimes it's more effective than doing a really sharp video. I do like to produce a video, and I guess it's part of my training. So,
right.
Yeah. I take more time than I should. I am going to do more videos. Actually, it's behind me is about to change and stuff, the tube traps, and the green screen is going in and stuff. So I'm a 4K camera I just bought and everything. So I'm going to be doing more videos here in the near future.
Looking forward to seeing those.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, I mean, if let's take myself, because let's take me for an example. If I want to create an audience using Instagram, what should I write in my posts to be the most engaging with an audience? Or what should I not write maybe in the post?
Well, no, I'll tell you what you can write. You do a picture of when you go out and work. You say you work at a number of different venues as an engineer. Take some pictures of you and the artist. Take some pictures of just the artist. Take a picture of the venue and then post them. Short explanation of what you do. A really good example of this is Dennis Moody. Moody. Dennis is an engineer. He's a live sound engineer and a studio engineer. He's someone that I've used a lot. When I've produced and I didn't want to engineer myself, I would hire Dennis. But Dennis is usually somewhere in the world, and he's always taking a picture of the venue and the people he's with. And he's developed a huge following as a result. He's a good person to follow as an example.
Ah, cool. I'll check him out.
Yeah. Moody. And what he'll do is he'll take a picture of himself in front of the venue, take a picture of himself on stage, a picture with the artist. Sometimes we'll just take a picture of the venue or the stage or whatever. And sometimes it's just, him at the airport or, whatever. But it's usually fairly interesting, short. No post has to be long. Most posts, the good ones, are short. So that's what I would do. Again, you're informing people what you do.
Yeah, exactly. And how do you need to pay to eventually gain a few thousand followers, or can everything happen organically?
It can happen organically. It should happen organically. You can pay. When I say pay, it's advertising, not paying for likes, comments, views, none of that stuff. You can do that. It's not worth it. The only reason why you'd want to do that is to establish social authority very quickly. So, in other words, if you just started a new account, and it doesn't matter what platform, and you want it to seem like it's an account that's been there for a while, then you'd probably buy, 5,000 not comments, but likes and views and stuff like that. The problem is most people can see through that anymore, so it doesn't give you what you need like you used to. It used to be fairly transparent. So I don't recommend that. It's, when all of the views are coming from Mexico City, for instance, that sort of gives it away.
Yeah.
So it's not a good thing. However, advertising has been very effective, I've found, and I've done a lot of it on Facebook and a little on Instagram.
So do you promote like a podcast episode, for example, or just your podcast?
Post, for instance, I'll do a post and then I'll promote it. I don't promote it as much as I use the ad manager. On Facebook, there's the ad manager, which goes deeper into how to do this. And boy, I can talk a couple hours just on that.
Yeah. But how much money do you need to spend to get to have a good advertisement campaign on Facebook or Instagram? How much do you generally have to pay?
Not much. You can say, I just want to pay $5 a day,
right?
For instance, and then just let it roll until it doesn't work, or $2 a day or whatever. I usually have 3 or 4 ad campaigns going at the same time. I have one that takes you to one blog. I have another one that takes you to another blog. And I have a third that is going to give you a free download that puts you on my mailing list that hopefully will take you to some of my courses, my online courses. And there may be a fourth one that might be for, a video or whatever. I've paid as much as $3,000 a month. Usually is much less than that because I'm only paying $5 or $10 a day.
Right.
For the most.
And do you see? Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's very effective for the most part. It's worth every penny. I make it back and more. Let's put it like that. Right. So it's worth it for me. But I highly recommend doing it if you want to be exposed to other people. Now, here's the whole trick. See, by just promoting a post, that's not enough. You actually have to get more involved in the advertising. You have to create something called a pixel, Facebook pixel, piece of code that you put on your websites and wherever you want people to go. And it measures them. So it does 2 things for you. First of all, it measures who's there, how long they stay, all the demographic information. And then you can go and you can say, I want all the people that visited me or visited my site or visited Facebook or whatever the case in the last 6 months. I only want the top 1% that read the most of my stuff. You can do that. But the whole trick is you can say, I want an audience just like the people that visited me. It's called a lookalike audience. So then Facebook goes out and Instagram, same thing. They go out and they look for people like those people that already like you, like your stuff. And that's the whole trick because now you're exposed to new people. So that is very effective. It works really well. But it's more than just promoting a post. You kind of have to go learn a little bit more about Facebook advertising. I should actually write a book on Facebook advertising. There's plenty out there, I'm sure, but do it just for musicians because it's really powerful.
Yeah, exactly, man. I mean, that's something I'm just experimenting with. I don't know much about it, so I'm quite careful. I don't spend anything at the moment now. I tried some small sum, but yeah, I know too little to make it work at the moment, to be honest.
It's all with targeting. You have to know who to target because if you target people that don't care about what you do then you're wasting your money. So there's a lot that has to do with that, the correct targeting.
Yeah, so let's just talk quickly about the website. So if you have your ad on Facebook, you get the person onto your website, what is the most essential thing for you to have on your website to either get them on your mailing list or get them as a customer?
Well, your website that's where all of your pertinent information would be. It would be everything about you, what you do, who you work with, who you're about to work with, all those things, all that information, a way to sign up for your mailing list. Your mailing list, I've found it very effective for musicians, engineers, anybody in the business to send a newsletter out. It doesn't have to be once a month, but it could be once every 2 or 3 months. It's very effective to send that out and just say, this is what I've done. This is what I'm working with. I get that from many people, and I find it really interesting because there are some people that I know well, but yet I would never ask them, who are you working with? And I see it and I go, oh, okay, that's cool. I know what to talk to them about next time I see them. And there are some people that I'm just kind of curious of keeping up with. So it's useful to do. And ideally, you want to get them on that mailing list. And sometimes usually the traditional way of online marketing is you give them something for free in order to sign up with the mailing list. What I do is I give them a PDF, and there's lots of different ones that you can get. I think the one that's working best now is the 6 frequencies to avoid during a mix or something like that, which is pretty good. But anyway, sometimes if you just say, hey, sign up for my mailing list to keep track of, and I'll let you know what I'm doing, and that could be sufficient enough.
Right. Yeah, very good advice, man.
But the other thing you want is you want a press page. Now, press page, don't misconstrue this. A press page is stuff about you that the press can use. It's really good pictures, various pictures, high and low res. It's if you have a logo, it's logo graphics. It's comments about your work. It's links to music. It's all sorts of things that if a blogger, journalist, anybody wants to write something about you, it's all there. And this is really important, and I can't tell you the number of times this has helped. And I can't tell you as somebody, as a writer, that the times I'm looking for something like this and I can't find it, and it makes me angry because it's so easy to put together. So I think that's one of the most important things. The other important thing would be how do I get in touch with you if I want to hire you?
Right, so contact page or form, yeah. Cool. That's good advice, man. Thanks for that. And just before we wrap up here, where can the listeners find more about you and your books and all the great content you put out?
And the best place is bobbyowsinski.com. And you can get to everything from there. All the courses, books, blogs, podcasts, all that stuff you can get to from there.
Great. Yeah, I'll link that in the description so people can find it there. But thanks, Bobby. It was awesome talking to you, and thanks for coming on to the podcast, man.
Yeah, my pleasure, Nicholas.
Thank you very much, Bobby, for coming on to the podcast. It was awesome having you on, and I hope you, the listener, found some great and useful tips that you can use on your own. But before you leave, I want to tell you about the free guide, 3 tested ways to increase your client base. Link below. And before you leave, please leave a rating and a comment below so iTunes and Spotify can work its magic and help spread the word. That's all for today, and I'll see you next week.